Hello, everybody. This is James Fee, and you are at Hanging with James Fee. This is episode, I believe, 5, Witherware 2.0. I have a couple guests with me this week. I have Sean Gorman from GeoIQ, who should light up here any moment, hopefully. And, of course, as always, Madeline Steele from WeoGeo. How you doing, Madeline?
I'm doing great today. How are you?
I'm doing good. How about you, Sean? How are things over there on the right coast?
Plugging along. We actually have no humidity today, which happens, once every year. So it's nice.
It's August, though. You got to have
Yeah, I
humidity
know.
in August.
Complete anomaly.
Well, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Just as a reminder, make sure you go to weogeo.com/videos and click on Sean Gorman's face, and you'll be able to comment and send us comments and questions that you all know you want to ask Sean. So, Sean, how have things been going? You've been busy lately, huh?
Yeah, no, it's been a pretty crazy month or so, going out to the user conference for the first time, and yeah, just learning a whole new technology and corporate side of things. But it's been exciting, and yeah, lots to do, and teams all revved up and start to actually push some stuff out. I think got the GitHub and open source stuff out yesterday, which the guys were psyched about getting working on, and yeah, it's kind of an endless barrage of fun things to do.
So the DC Dev Center, that's what you guys are calling yourself now?
Yeah, I think it seems to be the abbreviation folks are settling on, but I'm sure it'll kind of morph and evolve. But it seems to be what's the lexicon for now.
So what does that mean? What are you guys going to do for Esri?
Well, it's kind of interesting. There's a couple of other dev centers that they've set up. So there's one in Zurich, Switzerland, which was the procedural team that do all the 3D buildings, Pixar stuff. There's a dev center in Beijing, China that does R&D and 3D stuff as well. And then the Spot On team that does the IBM Cognos integration in Ottawa is the other dev center. So we'll be the fourth one. But the idea with all the dev centers is they're part of the core engineering team, but they're located outside of Redlands. And typically each of the groups kind of has a different customer outreach, so that the core engineering is a little more connected with the various end customers. So we'll be doing a lot of stuff with folks in the DC area. So the NGO and government agency people will be working with closely to get requirements and then help bake those into do R&D things that connect in with the core engineering folks at Esri and Redlands.
Cool. So, what does that mean for things such as GeoCommons? Clearly it's still going to be around. Are we going to see that integrated a little bit with ArcGIS Online, you think, or is that still up in the air?
Yeah, that's one of the one of the major things that we're working on is kind of twofold. So we've kind of going through and looking at things that ArcGIS Online has that GeoCommons didn't have, things that GeoCommons had that ArcGIS Online doesn't have, and seeing what the delta is, the gap between the two. And then the team's working on taking the same capabilities and building them into ArcGIS Online. And then when we get something close to parity between the two platforms, we'll work at migrating the users and accounts and data over to it. And then we're kicking around a lot of ideas about how can we take the general concept of GeoCommons as a public data community and bring in some of those concepts into ArcGIS Online. But that's at pretty early stages as far as evolving that. The first goal is kind of how do we get the technical capabilities over? How do we learn more about ArcGIS Server and the various building blocks that they use there? How can we evolve and stretch those things to do some of the stuff that we did in GeoIQ and GeoCommons? What are some of the user design principles that worked well that we can carry over? What are things that we can learn on the side coming back from Esri where they've done things that their community and customers like really well. So there's a lot of knowledge exchange and trying to figure out where the deltas are between the two, and then putting engineering teams on building that stuff out, and just learning more about the base technology a lot on our end.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you guys have been focused in the last year or so on visualization, a lot about visualization of data. Clearly, I think there's a little bit of opportunity there to work on the visualization of classic GIS data. What are you thinking as far as direction? Not so much as specifics about where you're going, but an overarching GIS theme we talked a little bit with Gretchen 2 weeks ago about it, and it seems like everyone's real interested in cartography. So cartography, visualization, you basically the same kind of things. Of course, every cartographer just cringed as I said that. But what are you thinking as far as the visualization of GIS data and where it's moving forward in the next year or two?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting opportunity for us in that it gives us a chance to move off some of the legacy things that we've been trying to migrate off of anyways. When we first built GeoCommons, a lot of big data visualization was handled by Flash. Stamen was using it. There was Modest Maps Flash, and that was kind of the cool thing to be doing your viz in. And then as things evolved, obviously Flash isn't the place anybody wants to be anymore. And there's been a lot of new creative ways to handle data visualization on the browser side. So it's nice because this gives us an opportunity to go in, separate out some of those libraries we've been working on for like the Twitch stuff for doing streaming real-time data, and on the JavaScript side using HTML5, and then look at how we can take some of those capabilities and build them in as both potentially open source libraries, but building it into the Esri Maps front end. So a lot of what we've been thinking about is how can we make the cartography opportunities on on the browser side more robust, so that you can do things that are they typically you can only do in a desktop, or even more recently things that you need to be able to do with real-time streaming data sources. So that because that's kind of was one of the trade-offs with doing everything in tiles is it's really hard to dynamically update those things if you have a heavy streaming data source coming against it. Whereas stuff like Flash or WebGL works really well for that. And then you have all the trade-offs of having a thick client plugin that you have to put into place. But the team's come up with some really clever stuff as far as having dynamic tile rendering and be able to do that really high speed to have streaming and updating dynamic cartography against it. And that's one of the things I think we'll hopefully see a lot of innovation. So I think folks like Development Seed and CartoDB and Esri and others have done a lot of really cool stuff with making really nice looking tiles and doing really nice looking visualization with that. So a lot of what we've been thinking about is where does that go next when the map's no longer static? How do we begin to get these real-time streams coming off of mobile devices and social media, sensors and the such, and really have this really interactive, rich visualization cartography? What are both the cartographic techniques for doing that, but then also what's the technology in the browser that lets us handle that kind of experience so people can have a nice canvas to do fun things on?
Cool. It's interesting as I hear you talk about that. If you think about sort of, I guess, GeoIQ, WeoGeo, we're all sort of children of Where 2.0, and sort of the concept of what that, who knows what that was going to be. It's almost like we're talking about something beyond what we hoped Where 2.0 would be. What are you sort of thinking about, what was the hope of Where 2.0, and now that maybe we're over it, what do we really want from GIS and geospatial technology at this point?
Yeah, and I think the original concept with Where 2.0 and really GeoCommons to a large perspective was how do you make GIS relevant to everybody that's not a GIS nerd, right? You have all these folks that haven't taken a geography class, and they may have looked at an atlas. They've seen Google Maps and Google Earth and think it's cool, and they want to do something more, right? And it's like, how do you cast that wider net to create a bigger diaspora of people that are going to get excited about the same things we get excited about? And to a certain extent, I think there was a lot of success in doing that, and a lot of people came to the table that normally wouldn't be engaged in geography. And then you had these really popular services like Foursquare and location-based services like that popped up that got a lot of attention. But then I think we've kind of gotten to this point of where everybody came to the curb and said, "Wow, that's a cool-looking car, but what do I do with it?" And I think kind of that's the phase that we've gotten to now, and that we've drawn a lot of attention, a lot of people of they're intrigued and interested and they like looking at the surface of it. But when it comes to what's the real value that it's going to bring to them, kind of that next stage of things is kind of where everybody's still at a bit of a loss. And you see that in the business models for a lot of the companies that emerged during that time period, and some of the challenges that a lot of people have had as far as how do you monetize this stuff in a meaningful way. But where I think that all evolves to is kind of this realization that while while geo and location has awesome curve appeal, at the end of the day, really, it's a feature of a larger context of things. So you look at folks doing a pretty good job of monetizing big data, for instance, and Strata as a conference doing well, whereas probably Where 2.0 didn't do quite as well. And in deployments and the trajectory of those companies investing in that side, having a pretty good valuation and exit trajectory, and that being adopted by a lot of big businesses, is because there's a really compelling ROI at the end of the day for it. And geo is incredibly important to making that an interesting play for a lot of things, but sitting in and of itself, it's largely ends up being a bit of a niche, I think.
We have a question from a viewer. Paul asked, is it traditional GIS data, or are we moving towards a location data focus?
I think it's a location data focus with a caveat. I mean, first of all, the GIS data and the GIS business, is a well-plumbed, well-known thing, and I don't think that market's going to go anywhere. It's going to continue to grow in an incremental, linear fashion, right? And there's always going to be the need for those kind of core things that we've all done and we're excited about. I think the real question we're talking about here isn't that core business that's kind of the foundation of what we all work around. It's what's the thing that's going to cause either exponential growth or really large mass market adoption. And I think from that standpoint, the thing that drives mass market adoption is probably that location data. But I think the realization in that being is that location data is just a percentage of the overall data that's getting generated, right? You think of Twitter being the extreme example. There's billions of tweets being generated. 1% of those have a GPS coordinate to it, maybe 2%. Another 20% have a rough location at the city level for it. And same thing with mobile devices. They're putting out all sorts of really fascinating data exhausts, but only a segment of that is going to have location data associated with it. So a solution that focuses purely on just the geodata within that overall spectrum of data, I think is going to continue to struggle. Folks that figure out how to use location as an innovative way to add more value to that overall canvas of data, I think are going to do really well. But I think that's kind of where we are as far as kind of, geo is so exciting because everybody can relate to it because it's a location, and I can relate to your location, my location, and the data's location. That I think we get wrapped around the bright shininess of it being geo instead of saying there's data, the data needs to answer a question and solve a problem, and how can geo help me do that, versus let's start with the geo first and then figure out what we do with it after we have the geo thing going.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, maybe it's overplayed right now. Geo isn't, or spatial isn't special, right? Everyone likes to wear those sort of T-shirts. There's something to be said about that, right? I mean, when you get focused on a niche so much, you sort of lose the big picture of how particular data sets, particular maps, particular anything fits within, this whole grand scheme of things. Now that you're working for Esri, Jack is sort of trying to solve this problem with their sort of geo design concept. Make a really big, what is this? Everything that we're doing, how does that affect humanity's place on the Earth? Maybe that's a little bit too big for a lot of people, but I think Where 2.0 was one of those things where people were so focused like a laser on one or two little things that it was so hard to figure out how could I actually really use this in my real life. And I think you're sort of right on that with how location data fits within the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think all the skill sets that people have built up in the process of Where 2.0 and new geography are some of the hottest commodities out there. But the way that we've chosen to apply those skills has been in a very kind of specific, targeted way, versus looking at what's the fundamental data problem or vertical industry problem I'm trying to solve, and then how does geo help me do that better? Versus I have this set of geo skills and toolboxes that I can do. I'm going to go do very specific geo things with it, right? Kind of put cart before the horse, right? I'm doing geo and I'm going to figure out a business for it later. Versus I'm going to figure out a business and I'm going to then see how geo helps me to solve that business problem better.
Yeah, I mean, you could look. Google's a perfect example. They didn't start out making maps or having fusion tables or anything. They just sort of did what they did, and then one day they said, you know what, it'd be really good if you could put all this stuff on a map, and bam, they produced Google Maps, which is probably, you know, one of the greatest spatial APIs that we've ever seen. Versus a lot of these startups that try to create, you know, maps from scratch. It's like, you know, it wasn't addressing any need other than their own, but it was so niche that nobody used it. As far as, you know, if we think back about 5 years, you know, the start of Where 2.0, what would be the one thing you wish you knew then that you know now, as far as starting down this path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew more about the ins and outs of investment and management and just startup structure and how that evolves, right? But that's really not the question.
Yeah.
You know, and part of it is this kind of ordering of, you know, my whole entire academic career was mostly around doing spatial analysis, spatial algorithms, and I like to do geo stuff, right? And so, you know, I was just looking for a nail and I was a hammer. But, you know, in hindsight, you know, a lot of what I just said is trying to figure out what the business problem is first, and then figuring out how the unique skill sets of me and the other people that we were working with could solve that problem and make it something unique in the marketplace. But I think, you know, the other big one is, you know, is kind of just, you know, kind of business lessons learned. As far as, you know, I think a lot of, you know, whether you're doing a big data solution or a geo solution, embracing the reality that no matter how simple you make it, folks still need a lot of hand-holding. You know, and I think we got so caught up in the mission of we're going to make this so simple, you know, my parents can do it and my grandmother, and you know, all they're going to need to do is arrive at a website, they're going to be able to figure it out. And the reality is, you know, I think we get so ensconced in what we do, and we spend so much time in it, we don't realize how foreign or difficult it may be to somebody coming in completely new. But you know, the realization that you need people hand-holding, especially the customers, for figuring out how to use these things and create value out of them earlier on in the business. And it's something that, you know, Esri does really well with professional services. You look at a company like Palantir that has 4 deployed engineers that go out with every.
Uh-oh. We just lose Sean? Guess all that hammering went up. Oh, well.
No
you know,
worries.
I think it's interesting. We'll get him back on in a second. I think it's interesting to look back, though, at, you know, sort of what he's saying is we were really working hard at, you know, making GIS so simple that your mom can use it. And nobody was asking, really, does my mom really need to use GIS? You know, she doesn't really want to run, you know, any sort of raster analysis on grids to figure out, you know, where the coffee shop is. She just wants to be able to talk to her cell phone and say, show me the nearest coffee shop. Of course, using the coffee shop example, as always. So, you know, that's always kind of interesting how that goes. Oh, Sean's back.
Yep, sorry.
Hey, bud. No, it's all right.
You guys got saved for my diatribe.
Right. Oh, no, so it was really good. You know, I guess it might be good maybe if you could go over real simple. For those that don't know Sean, his college career was interesting, probably more interesting than most of us, especially his dissertation and block. Would you mind going just kind of the 2-minute overview of what happened and why maybe that affected, you know, GeoCommons and why you created it?
Yeah, sure. So it was one of these weird things of, you know, I guess probably like a lot of GIS people, is I was a bit of a data hoarder and data collector. I like to go out and find interesting data sets because that gave you an excuse to publish a paper, because if you had data other people didn't, it made it that much easier because nobody could really argue with you. And so we were doing a lot of stuff, you know, during the .com boom, and people were saying the internet was the death of geography, right? Distance wouldn't matter. You could locate wherever you wanted to. And so we're like, well, yeah, since we're geographers, right, we should probably see if that's true. And so we started mapping out where all the fiber optic lines were in the US, and the routers and the colo centers and the electrical power that kept those things going. And so we just started mapping out all this infrastructure to see who was wired up and who wasn't wired up. And then did an analysis, and, you know, sure enough, you know, the big cities got most wired, and all these places that you thought you could go and be disconnected. You had no bandwidth, so you couldn't really do it anyways. And this is kind of both pre-Wi-Fi and pre-wireless, and all this kind of stuff. So basically, we wrote our little paper saying, it's not the end of geography, it's not the death of distance. It's even a more skewed distribution, that big cities get it predominantly more than their population would predict. So in the process of doing that, folks said, wow, that's really cool. And folks were fairly interested in it. Then 9/11 happened, and after 9/11, folks said, wow, we have all this critical infrastructure. What happens if terrorists get after it and do bad things? And so there's several folks in DC that were spun up to go figure these things out. There was like the White House cybersecurity czar Richard Clark, and then just about every agency had a task force of one sort or another. And so when they started going out saying, where is this infrastructure vulnerable? We said, hey, we have this database of where all the fiber optic cables are that run all these things. Let's run some analysis and see what would happen if you blew stuff up or removed links. And then when we showed people that, they freaked out and said, this data is not even supposed to exist. When we go to the telecom providers and ask them, they say it doesn't exist. They don't even have it on record. And we've been fairly clever, like horse trading network diagrams and fiber routes with network operators who run the routing tables and stuff like that. And so, this is in the 90s, nobody really cared, right? It was like, oh, cool, I have internet. Let me show you all the cool places I have internet. And so in the course of doing that, we put all this stuff together, and then they said, that should be classified. You can't be doing research on that stuff, and it all needs to be locked up, and et cetera, et cetera. In the process, then a Washington Post reporter heard about it, wrote a really sensationalistic story saying that, grad students' dissertation is a threat to the nation and it's going to cause all sorts of trouble. And it being like a classically really, really slow news day, everybody glommed onto it. And so, onto George Mason's campus, we got like CNN and Fox News and Hardball with Chris Matthews and all this other stuff. And, and then they ask you a bunch of silly questions and you give them, sane answers, and they're bored with it. So eventually it went away, but that kind of started the whole thing of with the company, because at that point the news trucks showed up. So the university looks and goes, oh, news trucks, that means we could probably file patents, and then we'll find somebody that wants to buy the patents. And so then once patents got filed, they said, hey, we're going to sell these patents to people for lots of money. And we're like, we don't really have anything other than I made some PowerPoint slides. I used ArcScene and some MATLAB code to make some stuff up. And so they said, well, then you have to start a company if you don't want us to sell it off. And so we said, okay, we'll start a company and look into doing that. And that's how GeoIQ started based on those initial patents. And the interesting thing is, once we started building this stuff, we showed people, oh, here's all our fancy, statistical mechanics, algorithms to analyze networks. But we take the results and make a heat map with it, and we slap that on top of TerraServer. And we said, look, satellite imagery with some analysis on top of it in a web browser. People said, wow, that's really cool. I don't really care about your algorithm, but the fact that you can do that in a little web map is pretty awesome. And then when Google Maps launched shortly thereafter, we said, ooh, cool, this is even better than TerraServer, way better. And so we slapped it on top of Google Maps, and people said, wow, that's even cooler. I want more of that. I don't want your fancy network algorithm, but if you can take my data and put it on top of Google Maps and make that easy for me to do, then that'd be pretty awesome. And then it just kind of evolved from there. So we said, well, in order to do visualizations, we need data. There's not a really good place to get GIS data on the web, so why don't we create a community site where people can upload their data, share it, download it, make maps with it, generate heat maps, and we're kind of off to the races from there until we realized that people had no idea what a heat map was and how to read it. And so then we kind of went, oh, I guess we should start with basic cartography. Oop, hello? Oop, I think I lost.
No, I'm back. I'm back. It was a hiccup. So simple, right? It's seems so logical when you talk about it now, but you think about the whole path through there. It's a miracle that you got to the end, right?
Oh yeah, in many, many ways. Throughout the process of it, yeah. I think with any kind of business, yeah, it's a minor miracle to go from actually starting it up, running it, getting it to where it can generate money, get investors, and then sell it. Right? You're definitely more lucky than good, I think, the majority of times. I think if you did it a second time around and did the exact same thing again, the odds of it falling through because of the million of factors that control these things, it's definitely a roll of the dice.
Right. I'm working on a keynote. I'm going down to Florida to keynote a conference, and I had an old PowerPoint presentation I pulled out, and it had Maker and Finder, which are the old. You remember those? With the exclamation point when everything had to be exciting.
Yes, and italicized.
Was it? I have to look. I deleted them because they have no basis on.
They're definitely end of life.
Oh well. So, what do you see in the next year as exciting to you? Either stuff that you're working on or stuff that other people are working on that sort of you would recommend everybody else to sort of pay attention to.
It's to a certain degree, things that excite me are maybe too nerdy to excite other people, but and possibly a bit niche. So take this with a grain of salt as far as everybody should get excited about this. But a lot of it comes to what we were talking about before with new emerging data sources that have geo in them, and thinking about how do we use those new data sources in a way that's meaningful, that people can understand and really create some value. So I think it's fairly potentially transformative for GIS and geo in general, is that you have these billions of mobile devices that are out there and sensors now that are creating some percentage of their data with geo in it, right? And if we can figure out how to effectively harness that data to do all sorts of fascinating things, I think it could be a big phase transition or shift opportunity for the industry. But I think but we have to do it differently than the way that we're doing it today, right? Because basically now you take like a Twitter data set, right? And you've collected 10 million tweets, let's say, during the Colorado wildfires. Like we were playing around with this at Camp Roberts for a humanitarian thing. And then you pull out the ones that have explicit geo that have a lat long, and all of a sudden you have 2,500 tweets, right? And then you take that analysis and you say, well, which tweets were close to critical infrastructure? How many were in a 1 kilometer grid? So like do a classic GIS analysis with it. Then you post it up. And you say, here's the social media impact on the wildfires, but you've missed 10 million tweets, or 10 million minus 2,500, that was really the bulk of what was interesting, right? And you've thrown it out because it doesn't exactly have geo in it. And figuring out how to work with data without having to reduce it down to just specifically the geo things, and be able to work with the entire data set first, and then find the implied geography second, is some of the stuff that's really exciting to me, because it gives you the opportunity that our analysis is no longer a postmortem, right? So if we kind of go back to that disaster example, or just about anything else you do in GIS, right? Something happens, an event, and then after that event, you're trying to figure out what's going on. So you collect all these GIS data sets, you make your map, you do your analysis, and you say, this is why I think bad stuff happened after Hurricane Katrina, or this is why I think our product launch didn't go well. And so much of it ends up being a postmortem. But the reality is we have all these people out here with mobile phones that are actually little portable sensors that are detecting things all the time for us and pushing them up to the various services that they use. That through that we should be able to detect patterns of things happening, within the seconds that they occur, right? And so if I know I want to run an analysis, and I can tap that analysis into this huge sensor net to push in all sorts of data to my analysis, and my analysis is constantly updating as new data comes into it, and then it detects a new event happening. So the first 20 people see the wildfire and tweet about it, and I can pick up and recognize that pattern as being a wildfire. I can immediately alert people saying, hey, I think there's a wildfire happening right now, and here are the messages that I think verify it, and this is roughly where I think the location is, right? And then all of a sudden we can actually do something about that. Same thing, a product launch goes out, and all of a sudden you realize that somebody really screwed up the product, right? They did one of these classic marketing mistakes, and they see that, people are going, you get this incipient buzz on Twitter saying, something's wrong, something's funky. But if you can detect that really early on and say, hey, I've seen this pattern, here's where I think it's happening, this is what's related to it, this is what people have identified, then you can actually go and do something about that, right? And Twitter's just an easy example because so many people have access to it. But really, every time you fire up your phone, it's kicking off all these events from every app that you run with all sorts of information. And a big chunk of this is geo, right? So if we can figure out how to latch into that data, I think the potential market for our skill sets and the technologies that we build is potentially astronomically larger than it is today. And that I think is the thing that's exciting, but it's also probably one of the more daunting things to try to figure out. It's definitely a lot harder than crowdsourcing geographic data sets on GeoCommons. I mean, that makes it look like a pretty simple problem to solve in hindsight, right? It's pretty obvious. This I think is a harder problem, but potentially much larger potential. But that also means it's take longer to do as well. But that's kind of my long-winded, esoteric, geeky thing of interest.
Right, and now that you work for a big company with lots of resources, yeah, no problem, right? We'll have that next week?
Oh yeah. Chris Helm's going to do that over the weekend. I'm pretty sure if he didn't do it while I'm talking.
Good. Yeah, I hate to have him have some time on his own to figure something out. It's better to keep him busy, right?
Yeah, there's no telling what'll happen.
Oh man.
So we do have one more question here. Paul asks if vertical solutions with Geo as a feature are the future. How does open source/open data survive as an authoritative source?
I think there's always going to be a role for open source and open data. I mean, I think in many ways they become the ingredients or the Lego blocks for building a vertical solution. And I think that's where we'll build these generic tools, right? At the end of the day, we'll be creating big data analysis, pattern recognition tools that would work for any kind of data source, right? And components of that will be open source that we pull together to build it, and then you'll take proprietary things, stick it together. Maybe some open data, some proprietary data. You build your vertical solution, and you go and sell that thing. Because at the end of the day, whether it's open source or proprietary, everybody has to pay the rent, right? And it's just what business model enables you to pay the rent. I may make an all open source stack, and then I'm going to charge you for my time to go build that thing. And it's straight services, or I may take this stack and then I'm going to charge you for support and maintenance and adding features, right? And then I'll license it to you, but the core stack's still free and open source. Or I may take a whole bunch of open source things, glom them together with some glue, and then sell that. Or it may just be a pure proprietary thing. So I think to that end, both the open source and open data they're all going to kind of cohabitate and live in a semblance of harmony that allows people to put together solutions that enable them to pay the rent, right? And all of us, no matter what side of the fence we're on, have to do that to one degree or another. So I think they become even more critical, and I think we see even more hybridization, right? I think even within Esri, we're seeing that of what traditionally was a purely proprietary stack is beginning to become more of a agglomeration of open source and proprietary and open data and closed data to meet what customers need, and also to engage more with the community as well, to collaborate around the building of technologies. So I think we'll see both sides of that happening, right? Of more hybridization and intermingling of open data and open source to build these vertical solutions that hopefully people are going to pay a lot of money for.
So we have one final question here from P. Black. He says, one of my frustrations is that data has gotten so large and unwieldy that infrastructure like PostGIS can't handle simple spatial intersection analyses at scale. What might be the next big thing in terms of infrastructure that will enable us geeks to power the next generation of big data analytics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that's one of the internal mandates we've given ourselves with the R&D Center is, how do we get geoprocessing to scale? And so that was one of the first things we did with Twitch, which is kind of internal project that we've shown off a few places, is with the streaming data set, we had two problems. Once we got into several, with millions of records, if we tried to intersect those, it either took a really long time or it would fail out on kind of traditional geoprocessing platforms. And then also we wanted those to keep running every second as new data came in. Neither of which work particularly well for a traditional relational database or the general geoprocessing techniques. So we've been looking at a ton of stuff. There's folks that are adding spatial components to MapReduce, using things like Storm or Hadoop. There's some interesting startup like SpaceCurve that's saying that they're going to be able to do this at massive scale with new technology. Not really sure what's under the hood yet, but But I think this is a big challenge for not only us working within Esri, but I think we're going to see a lot of folks in the community doing it. And I think ideally it becomes one of these collaborative solutions, just because it's such a core fundamental thing that we all depend on. Is having a good project that really thinks about having to do these things. And there's some stuff like in the Intel community. There's a thing called MapReduce Geo, which is geoprocessing on top of MapReduce, but it's all in classified environments, right? So they're trying to get it out to the public. So there's a lot of folks that are really interested in working on this stuff, and I think that's probably where we'll see a lot of coalescing in the community around solutions that do it. And on the backside of it, we'll see the same thing I was just talking about. There'll be some things that are fully proprietary, some things that are hybridizations, and there'll be some pure open source projects most likely. But yeah, I totally agree with what he's saying. I think it's a huge sticking point for the community right now, because as all these big data solutions come along and they're looking to do geo stuff, and they're going to say, hey, we need to do point and polygon, we need to do buffers, we need to do intersects, et cetera, right? And we're going to come back and say, data's too big, we can't really do that with our stuff, right? And then they'll move on to something else. They don't do geo at all, or they'll go look for different ways to do it, try to figure out their own and reinvent the wheel. And so I think it's a big challenge for everybody.
Well, when you figure it out, well, you'll be a billionaire, right? Well, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. We're up against the limit here. Actually, this is the longest show we've ever done, so you can feel like we got our money's worth out of you.
I don't talk as fast as Andrew, but I talk longer than Andrew.
Yeah, what would I do with an Andrew Turner show? I mean, we'd get it all done in 5 minutes. It's like those... And then
you would slow it down to normal pace, and it would take 45 minutes.
Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking your time. It's been fun. It was interesting to catch up with you again, and best of luck at ESRI.
Cool. Thanks. Appreciate having me.
Yeah, and Madeline, as always, thank you for running things and making sure things are going well.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Yeah, and next week, keeping on the Whither Where 2.0 theme, we will have Tyler Bell of Factual, ex-Yahoo Geo guy. Is there anything at Yahoo Geo left, Sean? I'm not sure I can't think of anything offhand.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's a lot of really good alumni.
Hey, they put a good team together, and then they never really implemented it well. But who knows? Maybe Yahoo, what do you think, is Yahoo 4.0 by now? Maybe they'll be back in on the geospace. Who knows?
Maybe so. You got Marissa Mayer, who definitely has had her foot in that. It's interesting to see what she does with it.
Yeah, so we'll catch up with Tyler, same time, same place. And everyone have a great week. Take care.
Thanks, James.
Bye, guys.
Bye.